Hello, MBA hopefuls. Welcome to MBA Waves. This is episode 132. This is your place, or this is your program for all things business school related. And we're really excited to see you. And don't forget that if you like what we're doing here, to like and subscribe for more great MBA Waves information. And today on our episode, we're really excited to have Nalisha Patel. She is the GMAC European Regional Director. So we're excited to have her here. And I'm also here with my co-host, Krithika. So welcome, both of you. It's so good to see you.
Hey, Laura. Thank you so much. Hi.
So today we are talking about the GMAT because it has changed since last year, and we want to track a little bit what those changes are. And we want to see how the test has been received, how scores are looking across the board. We want to see if there's any plans based on any kind of feedback GMAC has received and any lessons that they've had. So we're just going to dive right in. So Nalisha, welcome back. It's so great to see you again. And I hope it's in Europe this year.
Yeah, no, it's great to be back again. I was just going to say, like, time flies. It feels like not that long ago I was on the last one, but actually a lot has changed since then. So it's great to be back on the show talking about it.
Yeah, a lot has changed. So could you just start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and then a little bit about the new test?
Sure. So my role here is as Regional Director of Europe. So we are a US-based company, but of course we are a global organization, an association of business schools, and that's how the test has evolved into what it is today, because we are very, very closely working with business schools across the world. So while I look after the Europe region, and I'll tell you a little bit about kind of what that involves in a moment, you know, the Focus exam has been a global rollout, and so everything we'll talk about today, of course, there will be a European lens in terms of the people who I have spoken to, but of course, you know, I work very closely with my colleagues in all of the other regions, and so we'll be discussing a lot about, you know, how this has been received on a global level. So just to kind of reassure that that's the perspective I'll be sharing today. The other thing is that, so the way we operate is, you know, we have a B2C, a lot of people who work B2C, so directly with the candidates, supporting people to go on that business school journey. And you might have been to any one of our digital properties. That could be MBA.com, it could be Business Because, to kind of get along that journey. And you could have seen us on many of our other partner sites, and kind of any of those experiences, and working with people like yourselves here on MBA Waves to kind of really educate the market, to help people on that journey, and kind of alleviate the you know, the worries, the concerns, the things that you need to navigate while you're going to business school. So that's not just related to the test, but that's absolutely everything on the journey. And you guys, I know, do very much the same thing. The other side of the business, we work directly with the business schools. So as I said, we're an association of business schools. That's how we're able to be so closely aligned with what the business school requirements are. So not only do we get to utilize what it is that they're looking for in terms of their programs, but as an extension to that, they're obviously working with employers. We work directly with employers to think about what is required in the world of business. So ultimately, the goal here is people are going to business school. They're going to be coming out and working in the world of business. We want to ensure that people are ready to go to business school and then to come out of business school. So that is our kind of a whole sphere. And then aside from that, we do a lot of thought leadership. We do advocacy. So we're trying to, for example, promote business school to underrepresented groups, for example. So we do a lot of initiatives as well on the side. So that's a very short snippet. I could go on for ages, but I know we need to talk about the test.
Yeah, no, exactly. One of the biggest things about the test is that it's shorter. So what was the reasoning behind making the new test, the Focus, shorter?
Sure, that's a great question. And I think, you know, there's a lot of changes that have been part of this evolution of the test. And that, you know, if I go back one step, the evolution of the test has come about because it's been a significant amount of time that the test has been existing in its current format, or its previous format. And, you know, the needs of the business world have evolved as well. So we needed to relook at that. So we have a very impressive psychometrics team, who are award-winning psychometrics team around the world, And they are, we have been the gold standard, and we have wanted to retain that gold standard. And up until now, we weren't able to give the same level of validity and predictability of those scores at a shorter level until this point. And so that's why, because we've got that, we've done the A/B testing and we're confident that that's a possibility, that's why we've been able to make it shorter. What you'll also see is there's some things which are more focused on, okay, what the business environment requires. So obviously you can see that in the changes to our sections, and we'll come to that in a moment. But there's also some things that we've really picked up on the candidate side. So one, of course, having a shorter exam experience is mostly, I think, very well received by our test takers. But there's a whole heap of other things in there as well that we've wanted to, we've listened to, candidates, learner behavior and feedback, because people do kind of need to operate in those exam environments. They are very stressful environments, and we wanted to be able to speak to that through the flexibility in terms of the ordering, being able to go back, being able to take a break, there's just quite a few things that we've been able to offer there that make it a much more candidate there's much more optionality for the candidate to adapt the experience for what is going to be most comfortable for them. So that's kind of why we've changed. We also have a much more diverse testing population, so we needed also to address that in terms of how we work out our percentile scores, etc. And again, another point we'll come to touch on in terms of the scoring system. But there's a whole heap of reasons why we wanted to evolve this test, and we're really, really pleased with the product that's come out the other end.
Yeah, I'm hearing great things about it, and I'm really curious to hear what kind of feedback do you get from students in terms of, after the test, are they able to give you feedback, or are you getting independent feedback from students or from the business schools? How is that? What's the sort of makeup of how that works?
Oh, we take feedback from everywhere. So we'll be working, we support, we have a lot of our own candidate fairs. So we'll be working with them as they're doing preparation, for example. We'll be surveying people, understanding what people are going through at that point. Post-test, we do qualitative and quantitative surveys. Obviously, it's been really important to us because that's a new product in the market. We've been doing social listening, so throughout the web and social media platforms, to understand what that kind of more informal feedback is like. And then, of course, through partners such as yourselves, through test prep organizations, trying to really understand, what that experience has been like, and, so that we can, in earlier stages, if there's any bugs, if there's any issues that we need to resolve, that we can do that very quickly. Of course, as I mentioned, we have the candidate and the school-facing team. We have account managers for most of our business schools. They're in very close collaboration, as they have been throughout, to ensure that they have everything that they need, that we're picking things up off the ground. If there's things that aren't clear, we're updating FAQs and presentations and things as we have been going. And actually, everything's been, touch wood, incredibly smooth. We've had really positive feedback from both candidates and schools, and the wider industry as well, in terms of how we've responded to the changing needs of the learning environment. And so it's been a really nice, of course, not everyone's going to be, I'm not going to say it's 100%, that's silly, but where we have seen that there might be issues or things that might, and it's often been on a very small scale, specific things to do with, I don't know, a particular location that we've need to go in and speak to a couple of students about. But really, on the whole, it's been an incredibly positive rollout, and we're really pleased with it.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's great.
That looks like a great win. I wanted to ask more about, with just a few months of the GMAT-Focus coming in, and since January 31st, this is the only test that GMAC would be offering. Can you tell us a little bit more about the actual usage of the test and the number of people taking it and the confidence that schools have got and users have got about the test?
Sure. So we haven't yet. So what we're doing, two things. I'll split that out into two elements. So what we're currently doing is building enough of a data set to have a comparator between the previous GMAT and the GMAT-Focus edition. So what we'll be doing is running our predictions against those validity tests. So we'll be releasing that information throughout the year. So we're absolutely working on that at the moment. Psychometricians are heavy underway with that at the moment. In terms of the take up, it's been really positive. We had a lot of people, obviously, who were people who were doing admission cycle 1 largely were doing the previous test. So we had a big uptake, in the lead up to that. And then obviously anyone who was applying after that, we largely were supporting them on the Focus edition. So it was much more focused on the admission cycle and where people were on the journey rather than kind of, the specific test as much. Of course, there were people who were in the position where they got to choose and largely they were picking the Focus edition. So as I'd mentioned before, the feedback has been really positive. And there's another thing that we've been able to kind of see and do that's helped some of that, which is our kind of score delivery timelines have shortened. That's been significantly reduced. We used to have 3 to 5. Well, actually, that's our stated timeline is 3 to 5, but most candidates are getting their scores in just a day. And I think that's really helping the schools and the candidates, of course, because it reduces that time of the exam anxiety. So there's a couple of things that we've been able to kind of add on top of it that we weren't sure that we were going to be able to deliver, which has been really positive as well.
Am I correct that the test originally, the 2 tests were going to be together until June of 24? Did that change at some point, or am I getting that information incorrect? Was it always that it was going to switch off the way that it did?
That's right. Yeah. So we'd always set a Q1 sunset date for the old exam. So we were just trying to evaluate and make sure that the least amount of people were it might be impacted. And we gave enough time of that crossover to ensure that people who were already starting on the original journey were able to complete it.
Got it. So do you have any data yet about how the GMAT-Focus is actually better than the OG, the OG?
I mean, it's no, at the point, as I just kind of alluded to, the psychometricians are working on that kind of the specific predictability and validity, which is the kind of the technical measures that we would offer. And then, of course, what we're doing is trying to compile some comparable benchmark feedback that is, that isn't just a mix of the all sorts of different feedback that we're getting to be able to benchmark people's experience against it. But we would say that I feel like that we're on a very positive track with that, and I'm confident that the results will be positive in terms of it having its validity and predictability, and that the customer experience is going to be improved. So those are going to be our key measures. And then, of course, we'll be able to look at what that means in terms of the scores that are coming out. We need a decent chunk of data in order to do that as a comparable. And I think if we get to a quarter, we'll probably be able to give something more robust in that space. So you'll have to invite me back.
You are definitely going to be invited back, but we want to come to the celebration party.
Sure. Fine. Not a problem.
Yeah, and see, one of the points to celebrate was elimination of the writing section, and as well as, but then there's also been a little bit of anxiety around addition of the data insights as well. So can you just tell us about something more about decisions around it, and also anything that you can add for the benefit of the students?
Of course. Yes. So data insights was, and if I roll back a step again, we did consult with a number of people within business schools as we kind of evolved the exam. And so not only were we looking to business and the industry and recruiters and the corporate recruiters that we engage with, we were working very closely with the business schools that we're associated with in order to ensure that what we were evaluating was what is required required in to be a successful business professional. And so that's where data insights really stood out as one of the really key parts of that learning environment. And so that's something that has been very much valued and appreciated by schools. And I think the fact that it's part of the total score, it really helps people to it helps schools to better understand and assess that candidate's data literacy skills, which are critical. So that's been a really positive element that's been received. And again, the writing element, that was that has been received as a positive decision as well, again, because that has been part of the feedback that has been given to us. Now, of course, we do have other elements in the other sections which do kind of are designed to evaluate the students' language skills, especially kind of within the reading comprehension and the critical reasoning questions. But of course, we don't have that writing section anymore, and that's because of the weighting and the overall commitment we were making to the output.
It makes a lot of sense, considering most of the MBA programs out there are asking for essays anyway, right?
Exactly.
Good to see you, Nalisha. Sorry for being late. I was at one of your other events. I was at the GMAC MBA tour.
Okay.
Event focusing on the Middle East. So sorry I'm late. I was in 2 GMAC places at once. So,
I often find myself in that situation. Don't worry.
Right? It's so good to see you again, have you back with us on MBA Waves. So sorry again for being late. But, you know, a big point of worry for a lot of people has been about the percentiles, right? So the schools are obviously looking at that mostly to sort of put their minds around, like, how do they interpret, right? And like the table, right, with the classic. So will the percentiles change at some point, or can you tell us about scoring, like, which on the website explicitly says don't compare the old version with the focus?
Yes, I know. The thing is, you can say don't compare, but people want to compare, right? So that's why there's 2 things. What we are pushing schools and candidates to look at is that percentile value, and that's where we're pushing that. But we realize we can't evolve a test without providing a comparator. So what I will say is, so 3 things actually. So to answer your questions in sequence, 1, the percentile values will be updated in the concordance table annually, and that will usually be done in the latter half of the year. So you will that will account for kind of the latest population of test takers. So that's one point. Number 2 is that the schools have had coming up to 18 months of information about the fact that there will be a new exam, and they've had a lot of time with us to process. We've worked very closely with huge amounts of their teams as well. So not just within, 1 or 2 people within the team. People who've been wider in the organization have been out on the road. They've been on school visits. They've done large scale training exercises. We've been part of their, their website audits, their internal processes, where people have schools sending, systems internally that feed into their applications. We've been part of that. So the schools are very, very versed in these scores already. And I want to just reassure that to anyone kind of listening, because I do know that when I've spoken to a few candidates, there's definitely been apprehension there, particularly because we're asking people or giving people the option to send their scores afterwards rather than beforehand if they're in a test center, which aligns with the online test. And I think sometimes there's been a little bit of hesitation there because I feel sometimes candidates aren't as maybe familiar of how close we are working with business schools. And so that's something I just really want to remind people, that the schools are very, very much ingrained in what they're looking for and and how these concordance tables work. Where there's been any uncertainties, we've responded accordingly with the psychometricians team giving really quite granular detail on the technical side of things as well, where that's been required. So they are absolutely not short on data. However, I do recognize, and we always knew, that it would be an adjustment for the market, particularly as this is such a historical and, it's a really kind of emotional kind of score for the previous one. I really understand that. But we feel as though, what we had to do was to make that we had to make that choice in order to evolve the test, to make sure that we were able to differentiate, to redistribute the bell curve, and to recalibrate. So we have been pretty confident that that's translated across to the schools, and so we are now in very much continuing to reassure the market that that's okay.
Fantastic. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks for that detail. I still wish I could be a fly on the wall of all of these conversations you're having with psychometricians. You talked a little bit, Nalisha, about literacy before, and you just eliminated the sentence correction. So I'm curious, how is the verbal section designed to evaluate the students' language skills, especially since you are working with such a diverse clientele in the consumers?
Yes, no, that's a good question. And I think, we removed it in an effort to make it more relevant to business, and because that sentence correction wasn't as useful as assessing verbal reasoning skills. So in terms of how the two sections do evaluate the language skills, this is so, and I'll highlight a little bit on MBA.com, and I can post this in the chat afterwards because it gives a very clear rationale. But on the reading comprehension, the questions measure your ability to understand words and statements, logical relationships between significant points, draw inferences, and follow development of quantitative concepts. So that's where you're pulling in a little bit there. And then on the critical reasoning, the questions measure your ability to make arguments, evaluate arguments, and formulate or evaluate a plan of action. They're based on that short reading passage, so usually that less than 100 words. And so we feel confident that there is enough in there that speaks to that, and we felt that in balance, removing sentence correction was the right thing.
Thanks. I do have to say, I have a sentence correction book that you've made up.
Oh no! Well, you can keep it as nostalgia. It might be worth millions in the future. You just never know, Bara.
It's vintage, like it will be vintage.
Exactly.
It's grammar, which never gets old, right? Like grammar is always important, but
I agree. It's more important than ever, to be honest, because there's a lot of shorthand.
Yes.
One thing I had to add is that I really like the granularity that you have, especially at the top.
Yes.
Which was something that a lot of people were worrying about, saying that, GMAC is going to come with something like the 645 will become a 675, or will the 675 move up, and so on. But I think that the granularity that's showing up gives a lot more room at the top.
It does, and that's what that was the point, really, to provide more distinction across that bell curve. And I think we've been able to achieve that. And I do think that one thing that's been a real highlight for me is to be able to re-highlight some of these things that are super important about kind of the elements of the test. Sometimes we didn't get to talk in as much detail, particularly with the schools. It was kind of just an update and a reminder, whereas we've really got into a lot of technical detail with schools and candidates. And I think that's a really nice thing to be able to do in conversation, and so people can feel really reassured in the kind of standard of the test and the detail that's involved in building it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
We're all smiling from the question from the audience now.
Oh, sorry. Hang on.
There's one that says that in the next iteration of the GMAT, will there be an emoji section?
Brilliant. I think I'd be quite good at that, because you get those party games where you have to guess like the song or the phrase. I think I'll take it to the head office. Let's see what we can do.
Emoji and numbers, yeah.
Love it.
Nalisha, in talking about the scoring and the granularity of it all, how are you finding that the GMAT is being used in the marketplace? I remember that we used to tell students they should definitely be taking the GMAT over the GRE, because school employers might actually be looking at it for their jobs, and they don't want to necessarily take two tests. What we're hearing now is that that's not the case necessarily. So looking beyond your two shareholders, the students and the business schools, what are you hearing about businesses and the GMAT, and how that are they using it from what you're hearing?
So we have definitely spent some time working with them to make sure that they're clear on what the changes are, why the changes are there, and how to interpret them. So that's, that still stands. And it was largely consulting firms who would be looking at those scores. And I still recommend people include that in their application anyway, because, it's just another data point for people to have about you. And I think that's always a really strong, good part to have in weight of your application. I would say that, the market more broadly, yes, they engage not just with the test itself, but they engage kind of in the topics that we talk about. So you'll notice that we talk a lot about things that are important in business, whether that be kind of AI, the skills, etc. So we do engage them in a range of different formats for them to understand and have a nod, an acknowledgement, and a trust in the test. So there's two lenses to the way we work with those employers. But yes, I would say people, we have spent a bit of time. Those haven't been as, of course, our key stakeholders have been the ones we focus a lot of our energy on. But we have, of course, maintained that relationship with employers and updated and educated as appropriate to those, those systems.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thanks.
Okay, so I have another question for you, Nalisha.
Sure.
Do you have any data on any of the new functions of like question review and edit and select, section order? Like, are students taking advantage of these things? Is there any insight from usage? Like, is it possible that even that there's some kind of risk in doing so? Like, have you seen any correlation to, jumping around sections to lower scores? Like, what are we seeing here?
No, great question. And so I kind of alluded to this a little bit before, but now that we're kind of a couple of months in, we are reviewing the data. So we're benchmarking kind of what's the usage like, what are the impacts, what does it mean for our predictions on validity, predictability against the previous version. So we will be sharing that information as we've kind of conducted the analysis, but we just needed enough of a data set, in order to have a benchmark on that one.
Of course. Okay. We'll definitely have to come and visit you again sometime.
Yes, you will. You will.
Nice. Okay.
I would say that, I can give you some anecdotal feedback, is that people have found it quite useful. And I think even if they haven't utilized it, the knowledge is there is a big reassurance, and the kind of security of control, I think, makes a big difference into how people feel anxiety going into an exam situation.
I want to mention we've talked about anxiety 3 times on this call. And as someone who's a specialist in that and in test anxiety, it is super interesting. And there is something about the anxiety, and there's also something about gaming the system. And there's something about people feeling like, oh, if I can move around, I've got control. But you actually do need to know the knowledge, like you said. Like, you have to know the knowledge to do well in the test. There's only so much that moving around is going to help you. I mean, you might feel like starting a test, you're better at numbers, like that just might be who you are, or you're just better at language. And so, but gaming the system is just not happening on standardized tests these days.
It's just not a thing. I mean, I think, well, from our intent, it's that, some people might like to do the thing that they find harder first versus last, or the other way around. So that's where the flexibility comes in, rather than there being an ability to game the system, because there really isn't.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately it's always about knowing yourself, right?
Yeah.
It's going to
absolutely.
Knowing yourself, who you are, and where do you feel the most comfortable? Like, how are you going to perform your best? So it always comes down to that. And I do want to say, for those of you who are listening, if you do have anxiety, figure out how you're going to deal with that, because it's not necessarily going to magically disappear. You might just get more exercise. Like, you might be eating better that week. Make sure you get sleep. Like, all of these things contribute to doing better in all the tasks that are high stakes. So
I absolutely couldn't agree with you more. I mean, obviously, as you guys know, but not everyone who's listening knows, but I used to run the programs at London Business School. So I'm very familiar with students who are in high stakes test and exam environments. And so very used to being around that situation. And I think, it's really, really important more than ever, post COVID, where everything is a screen, everything is moving, everything's a visual assault, everything's intense, to make sure that you can take a step back and look after what you need in order to do your best.
It's also the time that we're living in, right? Like, I wonder, I'm curious if, because we do, bringing back the literacy question, like we deal with so many sound bites and memes and having to deal with things coming at us all the time, that in some ways we also need to be able to get to a place of slow down and really take it in with that hyper focus. And because when I started teaching GMAT, we didn't have memes, and we didn't have texting that I remember. No, we didn't. I didn't have a cell phone when I began teaching this. So we're different times.
I think it's an important thing to remember. It does make a big difference to the way that we operate as human beings. So it's absolutely valid.
Yeah.
And I wonder, that how many of them use this freedom of choice in this high stakes environment, because knowing that they can do it, even if they don't want to exercise it, might just make it easier.
I think so. I think there's a lot of that.
And coming to another point, I think, which is so important, how can people win in this high stakes environment? What kind of advice do you have for people to study, and any new materials that are coming for them for extra support?
I think that preparation is key for everything. It's an age-old, very cliched, boring, but the appropriate answer, right? So it's not about the weeks, it's about the quality, it's about the time that you're putting in, it's about the resources that you're using, and knowing yourself, right? Taking the time to either speak with peers. Not everyone has tons of money to throw at lots and lots of preparation. I understand that, but there is a lot of free resource, there's a lot of peer resource, and then of course if you are able to get the support of a test prep organization, and to really invest that time into getting yourself ready, because it will pay off when you get to business school as well. It's not just going to be for the sake of the exam. Actually, I do believe that. I really wouldn't be. I don't just say that because I work for GMAT. Of course, I've worked in a business school too. I do feel as though, getting your that muscle ready to think in that way, particularly if you haven't been in academia, business academia, or some of the areas in academia so immediately, and even if you have, you're adapting to a slightly different way. So I do think that preparation is the really important thing, and taking the time to think about what that means for you. Some people prepare in completely different way to others, and I think that's where you've got to take a bit of your own advice and the advice of others. You have to kind of understand when's best for you to learn, when's best for you to do that preparation. Some of the graduates I speak to at some of these fairs are taking that time in the first year because they know that there's going to be exams in the second year. So they're very prepared people. I'm very impressed with them. I think planning out some of that activity as far in advance as you can do, because as we said, life gets really busy, and it needs commitment in the same way that business school would need commitment, and then the job search will need commitment, and then your career will need commitment, right? So best to kind of get that moving. And yes, I do believe we will evolve what offerings we give out to candidates in terms of the preparation material. It's something that we're always seeking to do and to develop. And so as soon as we can do that, we'll be sharing that, of course, with yourselves and with the wider market.
Nalisha, when I think about what GMAC has done to transform this test, I think you've really considered very well the needs of the test takers as well as the needs of the schools, in terms of having the exam force people to hone in on what makes the most sense for future business leaders. As excited I am about the writing section being gone, I'm even more excited about the data insights section being there. Now, I know I missed a little bit at the beginning of the episode, and I think from my colleagues mentioned that you've touched on this a little bit, but I really want to know some more concrete tips. What I really love about this episode is that you're sharing how things have gone so far with test takers, with the perception of the schools. But I think people really want to know, how can they be better test takers? And some good takeaways, particularly with the data insights section, which is exciting. It's new, What can you share?
I'm having a little thing, but the one thing I realize I haven't mentioned yet was that the fact that I'm trying to find it. Sorry, I've got my laptop up, so I'm trying to find a data insight question, and just so I've got one to refer to. The thing that I meant to mention earlier is with the score report that people get back. We're offering a lot more detail in that, so I just wanted to kind of make sure that I got that in. You're getting that per section, and you're getting much more detail in what that looks like. So I think that one I just wanted to make sure that I mentioned. In terms of the specifics, we do have obviously we do have a lot more of the sample questions available than we did right at the beginning, particularly in data insights. We heard the feedback on that, and that has been evolved for sure. I struggling to think of a specific about data insights itself, but I would suggest I'm trying to think of an insider tip that would be useful for the audience. Maybe I can follow up with one in the show notes.
Yeah, we can add a link at the.
Yes, perfect. I do have a link that I wanted to share as well.
Yeah.
And speaking,
still, it's the case that, sorry, just to finish up what you're saying, I think it's still the case that you have this kind of starter kit, right? People can get like 70 or so questions for free. They get
absolutely.
Yeah, so that's all still there.
We can, and that's the link I can definitely share. There's lots of free materials available to people, and then there's more practice tests that are available to purchase after that. But I can absolutely share that.
And speaking of the data insights, even though yes, the test has changed a lot, really, like data sufficiency migrated over to data insights, right? And the data interpretation is as part of it, the graphs and the charts. And so is there any new kind of question in data insights that students should know about that just we've not seen in the original material, or is it migrated?
There are new items, but they are not new constructs of items. So these will still be familiar to anyone preparing for the exam. So that's the reassurance we can provide. I do have one tip. I think that you should study for the quant before the data insights. That is definitely something that we would kind of recommend. Was when we were talking to people face to face. That's just popped into my head. But yes, in terms of, we have followed the logic of the items that the psychometricians have been able to create, but just being able to adapt those into different item types.
Thanks. Yeah. There's no surprises.
No surprises.
Right. So quant before data insights, which is exactly, when we did data sufficiency, we wanted students to study the actual math before going into the data sufficiency and comfortable with it, and then applying it to a format, right? Like you learn vocabulary before you start writing prose, right? It's kind of the similar.
It makes sense. Yes.
Similar kind of thing. Absolutely.
For sure.
Great. Are there other things that you want students to know about GMAT-Focus that aren't so overt or are written between the lines?
No, I mean, I know that there's a lot there because we've kind of like thrown a lot of like, you have this, and sometimes that means the message gets a little bit diluted. But I think if people can go away with the takeaway that, the user experience is something that we've really thought about in order to make that experience better, but also the feedback and the and what you get back in terms of, if the score you've got, okay, great, but what you need in order to get yourself ready for business school, you'll also get some insights after the exam on that as well. So I think that's a really important point to note. And I will just make a little plug again to say that, we are very, very in touch with people about with the schools and the school and everyone who's reading the schools about the scoring system and the concordance table. And so it will just reassure candidates who are listening that they, that they should just be going forth and being having confidence in that space, and they should be sharing their scores.
Okay, what about I touched on this before, and it's funny when you bring a competitor into the small little screen we're sharing here. But can you tell students who are watching this or MBA hopefuls why they should consider the GMAT before the GRE? Or I mean, there's even some schools that are wanting or saying they'll accept the MCAT or the LSAT. There's far fewer.
Yeah.
Why? Yeah. I would imagine that your main competitor, right, is the GRE, and I don't know what the share is. I don't know if you know what the market share is between GMAT and GRE with business schools, but that would be
we don't have the exacts because our data is released in slightly different ways, although they did just release a wave of data. I mean, look, the key differentiation is that GRE it's a general test, right? So as is the GMAT is built by business schools for business schools. So that is your key difference. Of course, where people are in a market where they are looking to broaden the people who are going to come into their ecosystem and then make that selectivity harder. Of course, people are going to be able to want to look at people from broader groups and audiences. I will say that often, where you see, in the US where things are kind of test optional, or where you say, would accept certain things, I would say you probably need to think about the weighting the weighting you'd have to have in the other areas in order to make that a more viable than a direct business school exam. So that's kind of how we operate, that we are a specialized exam versus a general.
You know what, Nalisha, since COVID especially, which was a great accelerator for so many things in so many ways, testing was not left out of that, right? And that, at the beginning, I think GMAC didn't have an option for people to take it online, and then they suddenly did. And so that's been good. That filled that gap. But there was a period where many schools were offering test waivers. And this, I think, is just an extension of a trend we were seeing for the past couple of decades, where testing has definitely been under the microscope. And like, is it valid? Is it relevant? Is it problematic in various ways? And what we're seeing now is a sort of the pendulum swinging back the other way. Like Brown recently announced that they're putting the SAT back as a requirement, and so forth. So, what are you seeing? Like, do you have any insights from your side on trends with testing coming and going, relevance not? Like,
yeah, no, of course. I mean, look, the test, as well as kind of the business masters sector, started very much as a US concept, and I think the student mobility, the rise of different programs, the diversification across different markets, the innovation that happens all across the world in different educational institutes, that has all changed the testing landscape as well, right? So where people go to study and where test taking, where programs are more selective versus not, that has all evolved as well. And I think that, where we, that we don't really have it, particularly the main market. So in Europe, there isn't really a test optional concept. Everyone does require a test if if it's a major MBA or a business masters, and similarly for the Asian schools as well. So it is regional, and as you say, it has swung as a pendulum, right? Because people wanted to experiment and to see what those results might do, and of course people are under financial pressures too, right? A lot of these organizations that offer these programs are they don't have endless endowments and do need to have certain numbers in their classes in order to continue to operate. So, we are operating in some elements a commercial model. And so we have to take all of those things into consideration when we're looking at what that testing trend is across the world.
If I may, this has resulted in schools, I think, in Europe also looking at other options like the EA. And I don't know if the other thing is schools that offer their own psychometrics tests, like for example, IE in Madrid, they've offered their own test for a while. There's, I think, a few more schools that have kind of gone into that trend. And the difference with that is it seems that you can't really prepare for it. Like as much prep and goes into it, it sounds like very attractive. Oh, I don't have to do anything. Like, but even on MBA Waves, on several different episodes and several different occasions, we've spoken about the risks of accepting a waiver, right? What does that mean exactly? A lot of people consider the GMAT or the GRE for that matter as one of your first MBA courses, right? It's warming up your brain for being a student again. It's been probably for people a long time. The other thing is that it's often the main metric for scholarship attribution. When we're, obviously not diversity, but for merit-based or excellence scholarships, the GMAT is often the main criteria. That is, so there's a risk of nothing. And then in some special cases, like if you're going for MBBs, right, McKinsey and so forth. That
absolutely.
Occasionally, although I have heard whispers that is a little bit decreasing as test optional has become more of a thing, but we'll see. But as someone who's worked at a business school, something I heard from a lot of my colleagues who are in the program side, right, telling me there seems to be a direct correlation in people who either don't take the GMAT or do poorly on the GMAT who really struggle with some of the tougher courses like in finance or macroeconomics. And so there's a lot of reticence to accepting people that don't have a solid GMAT score because they don't want to set people up for failure. And
no, absolutely. It's a horrible thing. I've seen people not be able to academically complete a degree, and it's a massive time and financial resource, emotional commitment to undertake such a program, as you know. And people don't want to accept people who are going to are not going to be able to keep up, So yeah, you're absolutely right in terms of that being a really important step. It's not just a hurdle.
Yeah, but what about the EA? What might be some differences? Because they're both, GMAC products, right? The GMAT and the EA are the executive assessment, which is, as it sounds, designed for executive MBA programs, unless you want to tell me otherwise. What about schools that are offering full-time MBA programs that are accepting? What are your thoughts about that?
My thoughts are that we've been, we worked very closely with those admissions team to decide, not to decide, but, to offer the pros and cons of all of scenarios that people choose to undertake. And, we look at, what their pipeline is, where they're looking to seek people from, where they're looking to grow, what their selectivity, levels are like. And we'll always consult people and give them the kind of honest view as to what's most appropriate and what they should place more weighting on for a particular program, right? But if someone wants to use that as a benchmark, if they're comfortable with X, Y, Z other things, then that's kind of the whole point of admissions is it's a holistic view at someone's kind of rounded experience, and if they have those reassurances in other ways, then we're comfortable with that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, in many cases, bringing the barrier down makes it easier. Like, again, giving the freedom of choices. And coming to choices, I have seen that there's a trend in Asian schools to not accept the at-home edition of GMAT-Focus. What do you see in other places, in other regions? Is this going to be something that you will take into account?
Yeah, of course. It's something that we always monitor. Everything and every layer of our test security is very important to us. And we have we have an incredible psychometrics team. We have an incredible security team who work on technical things that even I'm not allowed to know about, because of course we have to keep that super confidential in terms of our testing, our security measures. But yeah, look, I think this is not just a GMAT related evolution, wherever there's an online activity or non-online, there will be people who do try to get around it. And I think that's been true of kind of all of the kind of rollover to online after COVID, whether that be in business school, whether that be all of the extra restrictions you now have to go through to get into your bank account. There will always be people who are, trying to get one step ahead of that online world. And we have had pockets where we've had to be much more investigate scenarios and work closely with local regions in order to look at what those remedial actions are. And so, yes, there have been one or two relationships, and again, these have been very open relationships with us. They've had conversations with us to share and to discuss with us, and often these are precautionary measures while actions are taken and they feel comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
We are winding down. Are there any last questions that my colleagues have, or Nalisha, that you want to know from us? Even, are there any things that?
Yeah, I mean, how do you? What are your initial experiences with the GMAT-Focus, and how have in your communities, how has it been received?
My students have been really happy overall. My students have been really happy with the prep that they've been doing and the scores that they've been getting. So I've had thumbs up across the board, and I've always loved
I know.
fan. So I've been happy with what I've seen, and I think it's curious that the writing section isn't part of it to me. And of course, I mentioned the sentence correction.
Yeah,
death.
As she hugs onto her book.
But I get it. Like it does make sense. And because anxiety was talked about so much, it is something that I wonder how GMAC really addresses that, or business schools in general in the world that we live in, right? Like this is just a character that has been omnipresent ever. It's just the world we live in is stress inducing. So how do we infuse mindfulness and ways of being more engaged and more present in order to be, the leaders of tomorrow? Right. So I do think about that.
Yeah. And we do have some kind of on the day test preparation advice. And if you go onto kind of the website and things, we do offer that. And even as part of our scholarship, actually, our Talent and Opportunity Scholarship, we offer access to a mental health app for the year to support you along that, to help support you along that journey. So yeah, it is very top of mind for us too.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah, a couple things I wanted to share was, on one hand, a lot of people have had sighs of relief, but on the other hand, they've also been very anxious about getting everything right because the number of questions are lesser and we have new sections in. I'm talking about some people who had actually taken the classic before and they thought the GFT would be easier, but the GFT actually turned out to be harder for them because they weren't scored on the data insights before, kind of a scenario. So I feel that people are more anxious that they have to get more questions right now. So that's where I see it's going. And to share Bara's concern, I'll be like, especially in today's age of AI, the writing section would have been like, your test is. A great way to actually see if it's a good sample and also to assess writing skills at the moment. I mean, that's my take on it.
No, I think that's really valid. I think when we started the process of the evolution of the exam, it was before even kind of ChatGPT had even released. What was that? Last January. So yeah, and it will continue to work with schools and look at ways that people can ensure that they feel that people do have the right writing skills. Of course, schools are having the same. They're having the same conversations with us about kind of applications and essays and things like that. I'm sure you're getting the same questions. So I think it's a sector and a community movement forward. But again, I'll come back to the point that there will be some. You would be kidding yourself if you were going to be able to undertake an MBA or a business master's without actually having the required written experience, and you'd just be kind of at a bit of a you'd be kind of letting yourself down, I think, in the long run, if that was something that you really kind of tried to And I don't believe people do. I think most people use it quite as it's designed for, as a starting point to build upon. And I think that's an amazing thing for us, particularly when, you're staring at a blank page and you're like, I have no idea what I'm supposed to write as the first word. It's very helpful in those situations. So I think, just promoting its safe use is a good thing.
Are we going to see a section with AI in GMAT soon?
Who knows? The world is the oyster. Happy to take any and all product ideas back.
Data insights kind of can capture that concept of using AI. There'll be some questions based on that. I mean, the whole test is kind of AI based in itself.
It's true. We've been using AI, just not generative AI, for a long time.
Yeah.
So interesting. So interesting. Well, Nalisha, thank you so much for joining us. And
thank you for having me.
We can't wait to see you again. And I want to thank you. I want to thank my co-host. I want to thank our guests for joining us. It was another great episode. It was a pleasure to see all of you. And MBA hopefuls, if you like today's episode, don't forget to thumbs up, and be sure to subscribe to MBA Waves on our YouTube channel and on LinkedIn. And to stay on top of the latest trends, be connected with us, because we've got great speakers coming up and schools coming up all about the world of MBA business, education, applying. And finally, don't forget to check us out next week, the same time, the same place. And for full access of upcoming and past episodes, head over to mbawaves.com. And bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.